Cale Rourke had stopped counting the days 3 years ago. Time on research stations measured itself in cycles, air filtration hums, shift rotations, the predictable rhythm of beings who had chosen isolation over belonging. She preferred it that way. Numbers didn't ask questions. Data didn't require explanations she'd stopped knowing how to give. The Xenobiology Lab occupied Section 7 of the Correlate Deep Space Research Platform, a structure so vast that entire species could go weeks without crossing paths. Kyle worked alone most shifts. Her colleagues, a mixture of Tethran biochemists and Colvan systems analysts, had learned she delivered results without requiring the elaborate social protocols their species valued. They gave her space. She gave them publishable research. The exchange suited everyone. Her quarters reflected the same efficiency. A sleep pod calibrated to human circadian rhythms. A small food preparation unit she rarely used, its surfaces clean from disuse rather than maintenance. A single chair positioned by the observation window, though she couldn't remember the last time she'd sat there long enough to watch anything beyond her own dim reflection. The walls remained the standard institutional grey. She'd been offered personalization options when she arrived. Color modifications, texture adjustments, the ability to project images or environments. Never bothered. The emptiness felt appropriate, honest. The morning, arbitrary designation on a station without planetary rotation, began like every other. Shower in water recycled through systems she understood intellectually but never thought about. Nutrient supplement because cooking felt like effort her solitary existence didn't justify. Review overnight data from the bacterial culture studies that represented her primary contribution to xenobiological research. Her hands moved through the routine with the precision of someone who'd stopped thinking about movement years ago. Muscle memory replacing intention, efficiency replacing purpose. She'd become very good at efficiency, at reducing life to its functional components. Wake, work, sleep, repeat. The pattern had sustained her for longer than she cared to calculate, carrying her through days that blurred into months, that accumulated into years she never examined too closely. The message arrived at 8:47 station time, interrupting her review of cellular metabolic rates in extremophile bacteria. Emergency assembly, all senior research staff, observation deck Alpha, immediate attendance required, no explanation attached. Kyle stared at the notification for 11 seconds. Emergency assemblies happened, usually involved budget reallocations or administrative restructuring, the bureaucratic machinery of a multi-species research platform adjusting itself to new priorities or political pressures. She saved her current work, secured the lab specimens in their climate-controlled storage, and walked the corridor toward the designated location. Her reflection flickered across polished wall panels. A woman in her late 30s, dark hair pulled back with functional severity, the kind of appearance that discouraged attention without quite suggesting hostility. She'd cultivated that deliberately over years. Invisibility as armor, protection through absence of presence. The observation deck held perhaps 40 individuals representing a dozen species. Commander Vess stood at the center, her Tethran features composed in what translated as severe concern, skin colors shifting through patterns that Kyle had learned to read during her years aboard the station. The room's temperature felt wrong, too warm, crowded with bodies generating heat in patterns her skin registered before her conscious mind processed the implications. Nervous energy, fear poorly contained. Vess spoke without preamble, her voice carrying through the translation devices that rendered her speech comprehensible across species barriers. The Veil Cascade, a spatial anomaly detected 3 weeks ago near the threshold stations. Expanding boundary, absorption of matter and energy across all observational frameworks. Technical parameters that Kyle's training allowed her to follow, even as something deeper in her chest began to tighten with each sentence. The cascade was growing, predictably, mathematically, swallowing star systems at a rate that allowed calculation but offered no solution. Evacuation had begun. Billions of beings relocated from threatened worlds in perfect order of resource value and population density. The correlate species moved with practiced efficiency, born from millennia of survival optimization. But the fourth threshold station stood directly in the cascade's projected path. Its destruction would collapse the entire regional network, stranding billions more in systems that would fall to the veil within months. The station could be stabilized, manual recalibration of core systems that had been automated for 3,000 years, 14 hours of continuous presence, radiation environment incompatible with biological survival. Vess laid out the parameters with clinical precision. Hour 6, cellular breakdown begins. Hour 9, protective suit integrity compromised. Hour 11, consciousness deteriorates past reliability. Hour 14, task completion possible. Hour 15, system failure inevitable. Every species-specific biology had been tested. Every calculation returned the same answer. Impossible without acceptable loss of the individual. The room absorbed the information in species-specific ways. The Tethran's skin shifted through color patterns, indicating collective processing. Their biological response to problems requiring consensus solutions. The Kolvans flickered into near transparency, their version of shock, their bodies physically expressing the impossibility they confronted. Other species displayed their own markers of distress, each filtered through evolutionary adaptations Kyle had studied, but never fully internalized. She stood motionless near the back of the assembly, her fingers finding the edge of a nearby console, gripping hard enough that her knuckles whitened. The metal felt cold against her palms, real, present, an anchor point as her mind worked through implications she understood intellectually but hadn't yet processed emotionally. They were looking for alternatives. Vess made that clear. Mathematical models that might reduce the presence requirement. Automated systems that could approximate manual intervention. Political frameworks that might distribute the impossible across multiple individuals, multiple shifts, multiple anything except what the physics actually required. One person, 14 hours. Certainty. Kyle listened to them talk in circles, watched them apply every analytical tool their civilizations had developed over millennia of survival optimization. Brilliant minds confronting an equation that returned the same answer regardless of how they reformulated it. The correlate had built their entire civilization on the foundation of never requiring individual sacrifice for collective benefit. Biology, culture, evolutionary pressure. Something fundamental in each species made martyrdom incomprehensible, a logical impossibility their minds rejected like bodies rejecting poison. But Kale understood it. Had understood it from the moment Vess explained the parameters, not through cultural conditioning or biological imperative, through recognition. The shape of a problem she comprehended in ways these species couldn't. She felt something shift inside her chest. Not decision, not yet, just the pre-decision awareness, the moment before choice crystallizes into action. Her heart rate increased slightly. Her breathing remained controlled. Everything about her external presentation stayed perfectly still, while something internal began moving toward inevitable conclusion. "I'll do it," she said. Her voice carried across the room, despite its quietness. Maybe because of its quietness, the sudden introduction of human speech into a space dominated by translated alien communication. The assembly went silent. Not the thoughtful silence of consideration, but the absolute cessation of sound that followed incomprehensible statements. 40 individuals from a dozen species, stopping mid-breath, mid-thought, mid-gesture. Vess turned. Her horizontal pupils contracted slightly, processing. Her skin cycled through colors faster than normal, confusion, concern, the Tethran equivalent of disbelief. "Dr. Rourke, we haven't formally requested—" "You won't," Kyle interrupted. Her voice sounded steadier than the tremor in her hands suggested, steadier than the acceleration of her pulse indicated. "Your species don't have the cultural framework to ask, but you need someone to say yes. So I'm saying it." They tried to talk her out of it for 6 hours. Kyle sat in the observation room while Vess cycled through every argument her species could formulate. The Tethran paced, a behavior they reserved for significant distress, her movements careful around furniture designed for her proportions, but awkward for Kyle's smaller frame. The room overlooked the station's docking bay, where a single-occupant shuttle waited in its cradle, already being prepared for a journey nobody had officially authorized, but everyone understood was inevitable. "Your genetic contribution," Vess said, not for the first time. The translator carried harmonics of genuine bewilderment. "Human culture values lineage. continuation of genetic material. This terminates your reproductive potential permanently. I wasn't planning on having children. Kyle's response came automatically, the same answer she'd given twice already. Her hands rested on the armrests of the oversized chair, fingers drumming a pattern she didn't consciously control. Your research, decades of potential discovery, contributions to xenobiological understanding that will never occur because you cease to exist. Someone else will continue it. The data exists. The methodologies are documented. Your individual consciousness. Vess stopped pacing, turned to face Cale directly. The subjective experience of being Cale Rourke, the unique perspective generated by your specific neural architecture and accumulated experience. This ends, permanently, irreversibly. Cale looked at her hands. They'd stopped trembling an hour ago, settling into a steadiness that felt less like calm and more like the absence of feeling. I know. Vess moved closer. Close enough that Kyle felt the heat radiating from her skin. Tethrans ran several degrees warmer than humans, their biology optimized for thermal efficiency. Cale's species had never achieved. The warmth should have been uncomfortable in the climate-controlled room. Instead, it felt like presence. Like a tension so complete it became physical sensation, pressing against her awareness. "Then help me understand," Vess said quietly, her voice dropping below the range the translator handled well, forcing Cale to interpret meaning through tone and context. What calculation justifies this exchange? What framework renders acceptable the permanent termination of consciousness in service of collective survival? Kyle met her eyes. Large, horizontal pupilled, incapable of producing tears but somehow conveying something that translated as grief. Real grief, not the performative emotion Kyle had learned to fake during her years of isolating herself from human connection. It's not a calculation. Then what? Vess's hand extended, 3 elegant fingers hovering near Kyle's shoulder, not touching but seeking connection in a gesture that bypassed language. If not calculation, what framework governs your choice? The question hung between them. Kyle felt the weight of it, the genuine attempt at understanding from a mind structured differently than hers. Biology that couldn't conceive of individual sacrifice, confronting biology that could. Not better or worse, just different. Fundamentally, irreducibly different. "I'm doing it because it needs to be done," Kyle said slowly, searching for words that might bridge the gap. "And I can do it. And that's enough." Enough for what? For me to choose it. The silence that followed carried texture. Vess's hand lowered, settled gently on Kyle's shoulder. The contact was warm, the pressure calibrated carefully for human fragility. Tethrans possessed greater strength despite their similar size, their musculature denser and more efficient. 3 seconds of touch that communicated what translation couldn't. Witnessing something that reorganized understanding. Observing an impossibility made real through choice. When Vess withdrew, Kyle felt the absence like temperature change. The spot on her shoulder where alien skin had pressed against human fabric retained warmth for several seconds afterward. Physical memory of contact. "We will continue to seek alternatives," Vess said finally. "But we will also prepare for what you have chosen." Kyle nodded. Understood that Vess couldn't bring herself to say suicide or sacrifice, or any of the words that might accurately describe what was happening. The Tethran language probably lacked direct translation for the concept. How could it not? A species that had never developed the capacity for chosen death wouldn't need vocabulary for it. The remaining 4 hours passed in a blur of technical briefings, radiation exposure timelines, medical intervention protocols, communications procedures. Cale absorbed the information with the same focus she applied to research data, filing each detail into memory with mechanical precision. Her training served her well, years of processing complex xenobiological information, translating smoothly into processing the mechanics of her own deterioration. Doctor. Marcus Chen, the station's human physician, walked her through the biological projections with clinical detachment that she appreciated. He didn't try to change her mind, didn't offer platitudes or false comfort, just presented the facts with the respect of acknowledging her agency. "Hour 6, cellular breakdown begins," he explained, highlighting sections of a holographic display that showed her body in translucent detail. The radiation damage accumulates faster than repair mechanisms can compensate. Our 9 suit integrity fails. External protection becomes compromised. Our 11 cognitive function deteriorates. We can extend it somewhat with stimulants and neural support, but consciousness becomes unreliable. Will I complete the task? Kyle asked. Yes. The protocols are designed to keep you functional through hour 14. Task completion is projected at hour 13.7. You'll have a margin. And after, Chen's jaw tightened slightly. Hour 15, catastrophic system failure. But you won't suffer. I can promise that. The medical interventions will manage pain, maintain function, and when function is no longer required, he paused. You'll simply stop, no awareness, no distress. Kyle studied the holographic representation of her body. Watched the simulation run forward, watched the cellular structures break down in cascading patterns, watched the systems fail in sequence. Clinical, inevitable, strangely distant despite depicting her own termination. Okay, she said. They assigned Dr. Narration as her psychological observer at 14:30 hours. Witness to autonomous choice, a position created specifically for this situation because nothing in Correlate protocol anticipated it. The documentation literally listed the role as newly established, with no precedent citations or procedural guidelines. Narration was Colvan, smaller than Kale, 4-limbed with skin that shifted opacity based on emotional state, a biological trait their species had evolved for social communication, allowing internal emotional states to become externally visible. They arrived at Kale's quarters precisely on time, carrying nothing, requiring nothing, just presenting themselves at her door with skin at neutral opacity that read as professional composure. "May I sit with you?" they asked. Their voice came through translation with harmonics suggesting genuine question rather than formality. Kyle stepped aside. Let them enter. Her quarters felt smaller with another being present, the space designed for solitary occupation suddenly intimate in ways she hadn't prepared for. Narration settled in the corner near the observation window, folding their 4 limbs in a configuration that looked comfortable, despite seeming geometrically improbable to human eyes. For 20 minutes, neither spoke. Kale attempted to continue her routine, reviewing data, organizing files, the habits that had structured her existence for years. But her hands kept finding empty tasks, closing already closed containers, straightening already straight instruments, checking seals that didn't require checking. The pretense of purpose when purpose had narrowed to a single point 14 hours away. She caught herself reaching for the same datapad 3 times without actually looking at it. Put it down. Picked up a sample container instead. Turned it in her hands without seeing what it held. Put it back. Reached for the datapad again. "Are you frightened?" Narration asked quietly. Kyle's hands stilled. She'd picked up a calibration tool she had no reason to be holding. "Yes." "But you continue." "Yes." Narration's skin flickered, transparency revealing darker musculature beneath, vulnerability in their species, the physical manifestation of trust. The conscious choice to make internal states externally visible. They shifted slightly, and their knee touched Kale's. Accidental contact neither moved away from. "We cannot comprehend this," Narration said. "Every model we apply fails. Every framework we use to understand choice and consequence breaks down when confronted with what you're doing." Kyle turned to face them fully. The contact between their knees remained, a point of warmth and pressure that anchored her to the present moment. Narration's body temperature ran cooler than human standard, the touch registering as neutral rather than warm, but somehow more present because of its difference. Maybe some things don't need models. Everything needs models. Understanding requires framework. Without framework, we have only chaos. Maybe choice is supposed to be chaotic. Narration's skin maintained its transparency, revealing the subtle movements of muscle and organ systems beneath. Kale had studied Colvan biology enough to recognize the pattern. Elevated circulation, increased neural activity in the empathic processing centers. They were working hard to understand her, using every tool their evolved psychology provided. "You speak of yourself as a tool," Narration observed. "When you told Commander Vess you can do this, therefore you will do this, that is tool logic, function determining purpose. Isn't that what I am, in this situation?" "No." Narration's hand found Kyle's, 4 fingers curling gently around her wrist. The grip was light, easily escaped but deliberate. Physical connection offered freely. A tool has no choice. You are choosing. That is what we cannot comprehend. Not the outcome, but the voluntary nature of it. The active selection of termination. The touch lasted. Warm despite Nimiresh's lower body temperature, the difference becoming less noticeable as their shared warmth equalized in the small space between them. Kyle felt her pulse against Nimiresh's fingers, the physical proof of her continuing existence measured in heartbeats. Regular, steady, biological function proceeding normally despite her conscious decision to terminate it. "I spent 3 years not choosing," Kyle said quietly, words she hadn't planned to say. "Just existing, following protocols, moving through routines. This is the first thing I've chosen in, I can't remember how long. Can't remember the last time I made a decision that felt like it mattered." "And you choose termination?" "I choose to matter." The words surprised her. She hadn't known they were there until she heard them spoken in her own voice. "Just once, before I stop. I choose to do something that matters more than continuing to not choose." Nimiresh's skin flickered again. Their grip on her wrist tightened fractionally. "That is the saddest thing I have ever heard a being say." "Maybe, but it's true." They sat together in silence after that. Nimiresh didn't release her wrist. Kyle didn't pull away. The physical connection became a kind of conversation without words. Presence acknowledging presence. Consciousness witnessing consciousness. 2 beings separated by evolutionary distance, sharing the simple reality of existing together in the same moment. Eventually Nimiresh spoke again. "Will you tell me about before? Before you came to the station?" Kyle hesitated, felt the resistance that had become automatic over years of deflecting personal questions. But something about the moment, about Nimiresh's transparent skin and gentle grip, and the reality of her imminent termination, made resistance feel pointless. "I had a brother," she said. "Isaac, younger by 3 years. He was better at being human than I was, better at connecting, at caring, at making people feel seen and valued. I was always the serious one, the one focused on work and achievement while he focused on relationships and meaning." "What happened?" "Shuttle accident. 8 years ago. He was traveling between research stations, random mechanical failure, the kind of thing that happens despite every safety protocol because statistics eventually catch up with everyone. He died instantly, didn't suffer." Nimiresh's fingers moved slightly against her wrist, a gesture that might have been comfort. "And you came here." "I came here because I couldn't stand being around people who knew him, who remembered me as someone's sister instead of just myself, who looked at me with pity or concern or that careful kindness people use around grief they don't know how to address." Kyle paused. "Out here, nobody knew Isaac existed. Nobody knew I'd lost him. I was just Kale, just the work I produced. That felt easier. But you are still someone's sister." "No, I'm just Kale now, was just Kale. For 8 years I've been just Kale, doing just work, living just enough to continue functioning. And tomorrow? Tomorrow I'm what's needed." She squeezed Nimiresh's fingers, returning the physical gesture. "That's enough. That has to be enough." The medical baseline scans took 4 hours. Kyle lay still on the examination platform, while machines mapped every system with exhaustive precision: cardiovascular function, neural activity, cellular metabolic rates, genetic markers, everything that constituted the biological reality of Kyle Rourke at this specific moment in time. The data would become the reference point for tracking her deterioration during the mission, before and after, life and termination, transition mapped across time. Dr. Chen conducted the examination personally, his hands moving over control interfaces with practiced efficiency. He didn't speak much beyond necessary instructions. "Breathe normally, hold still, this might feel cold," treating her with the professional courtesy of assuming she preferred minimal social interaction. He was right. She did. But when the scans completed and she sat up, adjusting the medical gown that had replaced her clothes, he paused. His hand rested briefly on her arm, thumb pressing against her inner wrist where her pulse beat steadily. Professional gesture or human comfort, she couldn't tell. Didn't matter. The warmth of it registered somewhere deeper than thought. You know you can change your mind, he said quietly. Right up until you board that shuttle. Nobody would blame you. Nobody would think less of you. I know. But you won't. No. He nodded slowly, released her wrist. Then I'll make sure you have everything you need. The medical protocols will keep you functional through completion. I promise you that. After dressing, she recorded messages in a private booth off the medical bay. Brief, practical, thanking colleagues for their collaboration, transferring research notes and project leadership to appropriate successors, providing access codes for her files and specimens. Her voice remained steady throughout, reading from prepared notes with the same tone she'd use for research presentations. Only at the end did she hesitate. The recording interface waited for her to continue or conclude. She stared at it for 15 seconds before adding, "To anyone who knew Isaac Rourke, my brother, I'm sorry I disappeared after he died. I'm sorry I couldn't be what you needed me to be, but I think he would have understood this choice. He always understood things about meaning and purpose that I struggled with. Maybe I finally learned something from him." She ended the recording before she could second-guess the addition. Submitted everything for distribution after her death, after her termination, she corrected herself. Using accurate language felt important somehow. The rest of the afternoon passed in mechanical preparation, equipment checks, procedure reviews, familiarization with the shuttle's limited systems. Everything designed to occupy her mind and hands, to prevent the kind of contemplative paralysis that might emerge if she allowed herself to fully process what she'd chosen. She ate dinner alone in her quarters at 1800 hours. Standard nutrient-dense meal designed for optimal biological function. It tasted like nothing, but she ate methodically anyway. Fuel for a body that would need every advantage during the hours ahead. Nimeresh returned at 1900 hours without asking permission, simply appearing at her door again. They carried 2 containers of what Kyle recognized as Kolvan meditation tea, a beverage their species used during contemplative practices, designed to promote calm focus rather than sedation. "May I join you?" Nimeresh asked, though they were already entering as they spoke. "Yes." Kyle accepted the offered container. The warmth felt good against her palms. They sat together on the floor this time, backs against the wall, shoulders touching. Kyle sipped the tea carefully. It tasted subtly sweet, with an aftertaste she couldn't identify, pleasant in ways that bypassed her normal indifference to food and drink. The heat traveled down her throat, settled in her stomach, spread through her chest with gentle persistence. "Tell me something true," Nimeresh said after several minutes of shared silence. Kyle turned her head. Their faces were close in the small space, breath mixing in the recycled air. "About what?" "About Cale Rourke. The person, not the function. Not the researcher, or the volunteer, or the human who can choose death. The person underneath all those roles." Cale looked away, out the observation window where stars hung motionless against void, distant and indifferent to every choice any being ever made. "I don't know if there's a person underneath anymore. I think I hollowed myself out over the years, removed everything that made me specifically me until only the function remained. There must be something, or this choice means nothing." The words settled into her chest like weight. She felt Nimeresh's shoulder against hers, steady pressure that asked nothing except presence, felt the warmth of the tea container in her hands, felt her own heartbeat, regular and persistent, despite everything. "I loved astronomy," she said finally. Small voice, almost embarrassed. "When I was younger, before I specialized in xenobiology, I used to spend hours watching stars, mapping constellations, imagining what might exist around those distant suns. The universe felt so big, and I felt so small, but in a good way. Like being small meant I could fit into all that vastness without having to matter too much." "Why did you stop?" "Isaac died, and watching stars felt like pretending the universe was beautiful when I knew it was just indifferent, random, capable of taking people for no reason at all." She paused. "Easier to study bacteria. Small things. Controllable things. Things I could understand completely." Nimeresh's hand found hers in the dim light, fingers interweaving with a care that suggested they'd practiced the gesture, despite humans and Kolvans having different numbers of digits. "And now? Now I'm going to save billions of beings I'll never meet by becoming part of that indifferent universe. dying in the radiation of a machine built by species I can't even name. It feels circular somehow, appropriate. It feels tragic, maybe. But it's mine, my choice, my meaning. That makes it worthwhile. They finished the tea in silence. Nimeresh stayed until Kale's exhaustion became obvious despite her attempts to hide it, but before departing, they pressed a small object into her palm. "From my homeworld," Nimeresh said. "A stone from the Valley of First Thoughts where my species first developed philosophical consciousness. Keep it. Remember that consciousness chose this. That meaning exists because beings like you decide it does." Kale closed her fingers around it, felt its coolness, its smoothness, its undeniable reality. "Thank you." After Nimeresh left, she held the stone for a long time, turned it in her hands, felt its weight, wondered if she would think about it during hour 13 or 14, wondered if at the end, when her consciousness failed, the last thing she'd remember would be the feel of this stone against her palm. She placed it carefully on the small shelf beside her sleep pod, looked at it for several seconds, then turned away and began her final preparations. The correlate gathered at 2200 hours, not in ceremony, they had no ceremony for this, but in silent collective presence. 17 species filling the observation deck, hundreds of individuals representing civilizations that had never witnessed anything like what was about to occur. Kale stood apart in a small preparation room adjacent to the main observation deck, already wearing the base layer of her radiation suit. The material clung to her skin, sensors embedded throughout to monitor biological function. Every heartbeat, every breath, every subtle shift in body temperature or neural activity. She felt exposed despite being covered, aware of her body in ways the clinical preparation had made unavoidable. Their technician helped her don the outer layers, radiation shielding, environmental controls, communications equipment. Each piece added weight until she carried an extra 30 kilograms of protective material that would fail at hour 9. The irony didn't escape her. All this technology, all this engineering, all this desperate attempt to extend biological function in an environment designed to terminate it. Through the viewport, she saw the shuttle. Small, utilitarian. Designed for one-way trips where the occupant's return was irrelevant to mission success, it waited in its docking cradle, already fueled and system-checked, ready to carry her toward inevitability. Her hands trembled inside the suit gloves. She forced them still, breathed deliberately. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4. The meditation technique felt inadequate for managing pre-termination anxiety, but she had nothing else to deploy. "Dr. Rourke," Commander Vess's voice came through the preparation room's communication system. "The assembly is ready. When you are prepared, please join us." Kyle looked at herself in the polished metal surface serving as mirror. The suit obscured her features, made her anonymous, transformed Kale Rourke into generic human in protective equipment. Maybe that was appropriate. What she was doing had nothing to do with her specifically. Any human could have volunteered. She just happened to be the one broken in the right ways to say yes. She walked through the door into the observation deck. The assembled beings parted as she moved through them. Not dramatically, just small movements creating space, acknowledging her passage. She felt their attention like physical pressure. Dozens of species watching one human walk toward a shuttle that would deliver her to certainty. Tethrans with their color-shifting skin. Kolvans flickering between opacity and transparency. Species she recognized from research papers, but had never interacted with directly. All of them here. All of them witnessing something their biology insisted should be impossible. Vess met her at the airlock. The commander carried no datapad, no official statement, no ceremonial artifacts. Just herself, standing between Kale and the shuttle entrance. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Vess did something her species reserved for bonded family. She stepped very close, into the intimate distance that most species maintained only with reproductive partners or parent-offspring bonds. Her hands rose, cupping Kale's helmet-obscured face as gently as the equipment allowed. "I wish to share my breath with you," Vess said quietly, her translator barely catching the words. "But your equipment prevents it, so I share my presence instead. And I tell you that you will not be forgotten, not by me, not by any of us. We will remember that you made a choice we cannot make, and that your choice saved us all." Kale felt the pressure of Tethran hands against her helmet, felt the heat radiating through the material. Vess's body temperature elevated beyond her baseline, emotional arousal manifesting physically. Felt the tremor in Vess's breathing that meant grief beyond translation. "Thank you," Kyle managed. Inadequate words for the moment, but the only ones she had. When Vess withdrew, Kale saw her skin cycling through colors rapidly, the Tethran equivalent of tears, emotional release expressed through chromatic shift rather than liquid. Beautiful and terrible simultaneously. Nimaresh approached next. Their skin fully transparent, every internal organ visible, vulnerability offered completely. They touched Kale's gloved hand with their 4 fingers, the gesture impossibly gentle. "The universe is less today than it was yesterday," Nimaresh said, "because yesterday it had Kale Rourke choosing to exist, and today it has Kale Rourke choosing to end. But it is also more, because of what that choice preserves. I do not know how to reconcile these truths." "Neither do I," Kale admitted. "Then we will both live with the irreconcilable." Nimaresh's fingers tightened fractionally. "Goodbye, my friend. My brief friend. My friend who taught me that some choices transcend understanding." Kale wanted to say more, wanted to find words adequate to the moment, but her throat had closed around anything beyond simple acknowledgement. She nodded instead, hoping Nimaresh understood what she couldn't articulate. Dr. Chen approached last, handed her a small medical override device. "If it becomes unbearable," he said quietly, "if the pain management fails, or if you want to end it before system failure, use this. Quick, painless, your choice all the way through." Kyle took the device, attached it to her suit's emergency access panel. "Thank you. I hope you don't need it." His hand rested briefly on her shoulder. Human touch filtered through protective layers, but recognizable anyway. "I hope the universe is kinder than probability suggests." Then there was nothing left but the shuttle, the airlock, the departure. Kyle turned away from the assembled beings, walked the final meters alone. The airlock sealed behind her with mechanical finality. Inside the shuttle's cramped interior, she strapped herself into the single seat, placed her hands on the control interface, felt her heart hammering against her ribs despite the medications that should have kept her calm. The docking clamps released. The shuttle detached from the station with barely perceptible movement, transitioning from connected to isolated in the space between heartbeats. Kale engaged the propulsion systems, felt acceleration press her into the seat. Through the viewport, the Correlate Deep Space Research platform receded, grew smaller, became just another object floating in void. She was alone now, truly alone, isolated in metal and composite materials, traveling toward an outcome no calculation would accept, but every physics model predicted. She thought about Isaac, wondered if he'd been afraid in the seconds before his shuttle failed, wondered if he'd thought about her, wondered if some part of consciousness persisted after termination, if she'd somehow meet him in whatever came after, and could finally apologize for 8 years of running away. The threshold station grew larger in her viewport, massive, ancient, beautiful in its engineered complexity, worth saving, worth dying for. She had to believe that, had to make it true through the force of her choosing it. 4 hours until arrival. Kyle closed her eyes, breathed deliberately, prepared herself for everything that came next. The threshold station received her shuttle with automated precision, docking procedures executed flawlessly despite the absence of any biological oversight. The bay pressurized around her craft, magnetic clamps secured it. Systems that had maintained themselves for 3 millennia accommodated one more arrival with mechanical indifference. Kyle unsealed her helmet, but kept the suit fully active. The station's air tasted stale, recycled through filtration systems designed for species that no longer visited, optimized for biological requirements that might not even match her own. She breathed it anyway, added her carbon dioxide to atmosphere that would continue circulating long after she stopped producing it. The radiation monitors on her suit climbed immediately. Not critical levels yet, the outer sections of the station maintained some shielding, but measurably higher than the research platform. The timeline had begun, cellular damage accumulating with each passing second, each breath, each heartbeat. She walked through corridors that echoed with her footsteps. The station had been designed for crews numbering in the hundreds, maybe thousands. Hallways wide enough for a dozen beings to pass comfortably now hosted one human in a bulky radiation suit, her breathing the only sound beyond the distant hum of systems maintaining themselves without purpose beyond their own continuation. Signs of evacuation appeared as she descended deeper. A maintenance tool left on a workbench, its function mysterious to her despite her technical training. A piece of fabric bearing symbols from a language she couldn't read. Colors faded from exposure to radiation. The evacuating crew hadn't bothered to shield it from. A small sculpture, abstract curves that might represent a Tethran figure or a Colvan or something else entirely, positioned carefully on a shelf as though someone had wanted it to survive. Evidence of lives lived here. Work performed. Moments of beauty created in the spaces between functionality, all abandoned when the Veil Cascade made presence untenable for those who could choose to leave. Kyle continued descending. Each level took her deeper into the station's architecture, closer to the core, further from safety. The radiation monitors climbed steadily. Her suit's medical systems began their first interventions, protective compounds released into her bloodstream, cellular support mechanisms activating, pain management protocols standing ready for when they'd be needed. Hour 1. She'd entered the station. Task completion projected for hour 13.7, 12 hours and 42 minutes to save billions of beings she'd never meet. The core access waited at the end of a long corridor. Massive doors 3 meters thick, composed of materials that looked like metal, but felt wrong to her gloved touch. Too smooth, too warm, engineered from substances her species hadn't discovered yet. A biometric scanner beside them, waiting for authorization it had no reason to expect. Kyle placed her hand against the scanner, watched it struggle with her biology, attempting to categorize human genetic markers against a database that included 17 species but not hers. The seconds stretched. Her heart rate increased. What if the authorization codes Chen had uploaded didn't work? What if she'd come all this way only to be stopped by a lock, designed for beings who'd never anticipated someone like her trying to access their most critical systems? 20 seconds. 30. The scanner's display cycled through patterns she couldn't interpret. Then the doors began to open, slowly, ponderously. Mechanisms that hadn't moved in, who knew how long engaging with grinding resistance before finding their rhythm. The gap widened. Light spilled through from beyond. Not white or yellow, but something between blue and violet. Illumination that made her eyes water despite the helmet's filtering. The core chamber. Kyle stepped through. The doors closed behind her with finality that resonated through the deck plates. She stood at the edge of a spherical space so large she couldn't see the far wall. The core itself dominated the center, suspended in its own gravity well, a structure the size of a small building that pulsed with that strange blue-violet light. Energy fields she could see distorting the air around it, making space itself seem to ripple and flex. The walls were covered in script, flowing characters from languages she couldn't read, mathematical formulas she half recognized from her physics training but couldn't fully pass. The accumulated knowledge of civilizations that had built this place, encoded in the very architecture, waiting for someone to read it and understand. Beautiful, terrifying, ancient, beyond her capacity to properly comprehend. The console waited below the core, accessed by a ladder descending through empty space. No safety rails, no protective barriers, just the assumption that anyone authorized to be here would understand the risks and accept them. Kyle began her descent. Each rung required conscious effort, the suit's added weight making her movements awkward, the core's gravitational anomalies making direction feel uncertain. Down might have been up. The ladder might have been horizontal. Her inner ear couldn't reconcile what her body felt with what her eyes reported. The radiation monitors screamed warnings she'd been told to expect. Critical exposure levels, immediate danger, recommendations to evacuate to shielded areas. She dismissed each alert manually. There were no shielded areas. There was no evacuation. There was only the work. She reached the console, placed her gloved hands on the interface, felt it respond to her touch. Systems that had operated autonomously for 3,000 years, suddenly accepting manual input from biological consciousness. The recalibration sequence appeared on her heads-up display. Step 1 of 847, Kyle began. Hour 3. Her fingers moved through the sequence with mechanical precision. Input values. Wait for core response. Verify stability. Correct deviations. Input next values. The rhythm became meditative, occupying the surface of her consciousness while deeper thoughts wandered. The radiation damage made itself known gradually, not as discrete pain, but as a pervasive sense of wrongness spreading through her body. Warmth beneath her skin that had nothing to do with temperature. Fatigue that went deeper than muscle tiredness, all the way down to cellular exhaustion. The feeling of her own biology beginning to fail at the molecular level. The suit's medical systems responded. She felt each intervention as it deployed. Compounds flooding her bloodstream, artificial support for systems under stress, neural stimulants maintaining her focus even as her natural cognitive function began to decline. Around her, the core pulsed with rhythms she felt more than heard. Vibration through the deck plates, pressure against her eardrums, the sense of enormous forces barely contained, energies that could tear space itself if the careful balance failed. She was helping maintain that balance. One human, one temporary consciousness, standing at the nexus of forces that predated her species' existence, keeping them stable through the simple act of paying attention and making corrections. It felt important. That mattered. Even as her body failed, even as the radiation transformed her cells into dysfunctional debris, the importance of what she was doing remained clear and solid and true. Hour 5. The warmth had become heat. She felt it in her chest, in her bones, in the marrow where her body produced blood cells that were increasingly malformed and useless. The medical readouts confirmed what her body already knew. Cellular breakdown accelerating, immune function compromised, early signs of organ damage. Still manageable, still within the parameters Chen had projected, still functional enough to continue the work. Her hands maintained their rhythm. Step 238 of 847, less than a third complete, so much time remaining, so many hours of deterioration ahead. She thought about the people she was saving, tried to imagine them. Billions of individuals across dozens of worlds, each one a unique consciousness, with memories and relationships and purposes. Each one alive because she'd chosen to stop being alive. The math didn't make sense to her. How could one life equal billions? How could her small, damaged, temporary existence possibly balance against the collective weight of so many others? But the correlate understood value differently. They'd tried to explain it during the briefings. That individual consciousness was precious beyond calculation. That no number of other lives could justify the deliberate termination of one. Their ethics made sacrifice incomprehensible because the math would never work out. Human ethics worked differently, allowed for the possibility that sometimes individual termination served purposes larger than individual continuation. Not better ethics, not more evolved, just different. Shaped by different evolutionary pressures, different cultural development, different biological constraints. Hour 7. The first major system warnings appeared. Cardiovascular efficiency declining, neural processing showing degradation markers, immune system essentially non-functional. Radiation damage accumulating in patterns that would become catastrophic within hours. The medical interventions intensified. She felt them as intrusions now rather than support. Foreign substances in her bloodstream, artificial electrical impulses forcing her heart to maintain rhythm, synthetic compounds that kept her neurons firing despite the damage. She was becoming more machine than biology, more chemical support than natural function, her consciousness riding on pharmaceutical scaffolding that would only last so long before collapsing under the weight of her body's failure. The core pulsed. She felt it synchronizing with something in her chest, not her heartbeat exactly, but some deeper rhythm. The overlap between dying human and ancient machine, creating harmonies she had no words for. She wondered if the core knew, if somewhere in its vast computational architecture, it recognized that a consciousness was choosing to terminate in order to preserve its function, if it appreciated the gesture or even comprehended it. Probably not. Probably it processed her inputs the same way it processed 3 millennia of automated maintenance, information arriving, corrections implemented, operations continuing, No awareness of source or cost. That was okay. She didn't need the core to understand, didn't need gratitude from machinery or recognition from systems that predated her species. She just needed to finish the work. That was enough. Hour 9. Suit integrity compromised. The projection had been accurate to the minute. She felt the radiation levels inside her protective layers climb sharply, felt her skin prickling with sensation that bypassed normal pain receptors, direct cellular damage, producing responses her nervous system had no categories for. The core's light seemed brighter now, or her pupils were dilating, or something about dying was changing her perception of illumination. The chamber filled with colors she couldn't name, wavelengths her human biology shouldn't be able to process. Beautiful and terrible, like watching the universe reveal itself in ways that required you to stop being yourself to see. Her hands maintained their rhythm. Input, response, correction. The work had become everything. Her entire existence narrowed to this single function. These movements, this purpose. Step 512 of 847, past the midpoint, descent into the final stretch. Hour 11, consciousness becoming unreliable. The projection had been accurate about this too. She felt her thoughts fragmenting, attention scattering across inputs she struggled to organize into coherent meaning. The core's displays blurred, doubled, required active concentration to resolve into data she could use. Her hands moved through sequences she didn't remember initiating, muscle memory carrying her when cognitive function faltered. The medical systems delivered something new. She felt it hit her bloodstream like lightning, like ice, like fire. Synthetic clarity forcing her awareness to cohere when every natural process wanted to let it dissolve into comfortable confusion. Chemical consciousness, borrowed time, artificial extension of function past biological limits. She was grateful for it, grateful for the intervention that kept her present and aware and capable even as her body fell apart around her. Through her communication link, voices spoke words she couldn't fully process. Vess saying something about her vitals, Chen adjusting medical protocols, Nimaresh asking if she could hear them. She couldn't respond, couldn't spare the attention needed to formulate words and activate the transmission. Every remaining fragment of her consciousness devoted to the work. The core pulsed brighter, or she was losing visual acuity, or both. Hard to distinguish between perception and neurological failure at this stage. Step 693, so close now. Just 154 steps remaining, just 2 more hours. Less than 2 hours. She could do this. Her body might be failing, but her will persisted. Choice continuing beyond capacity. Human stubbornness outlasting biological limitation. Worth it, she thought again. Whatever came next. However this ended. Worth it. Hour 13. The pain had transcended description. Not something she experienced, but something she existed within. Every cell broadcasting its termination through neural pathways compromised beyond reliability. Her body screaming in languages she couldn't translate, begging her to stop, to rest, to let go. But her hands kept moving. That was the miracle. That was what the correlate would never understand. That human will could override every biological imperative. That choice could persist beyond reason's collapse. That consciousness could force a dying body to continue serving purpose it no longer comprehended. The core pulsed in perfect synchronization with whatever still beat in her chest. She couldn't tell anymore where the machine ended, and she began. Couldn't distinguish between energies regulating faster than light travel and electrical impulses, barely sustaining her neural function. Appropriate. She was becoming part of the station. Her termination would be absorption into the machinery she'd saved. Physics rather than biology. Mathematics rather than mortality. Step 816. Her vision had narrowed to a tunnel containing only the console. Everything peripheral had disappeared. The chamber's vast space, the core's light, even her own body beyond her hands. Just the work, just the sequences, just the rhythm that had become her entire existence. The communication link crackled, Chen's voice urgent. "Kyle, you're almost there. 31 steps. You're going to make it." Make it. The phrase felt absurd. She was dying, would be dead within the hour, but she'd make it. Complete the task. Achieve the purpose that justified everything. Step 830. Her heart stuttered, felt it happen like mechanical failure, the muscle forgetting its function. The suit systems compensated immediately, artificial pacemaker forcing rhythm back into chaos. Step 840. The core's stability displays shifted toward final configuration. Nearly there. Nearly done. Step 847. Final sequence completed. The core's light shifted to new configuration. The displays indicated stability achieved. Recalibration successful. Mission accomplished. Done. Kyle tried to stand. Her legs didn't respond. Nervous system too compromised to process motor commands. She sat back down, hands still resting on the console. Hour 14. Task completion. According to every projection, she had 1 hour remaining. 60 minutes of consciousness before system failure. She felt strangely calm. The pain had become distant somehow. Maybe the medical protocols. Maybe her nervous system too damaged to transmit sensation. Maybe acceptance making everything feel less urgent. She'd done what she came to do. Saved billions. Mattered. Made a choice that transformed 8 years of empty existence into something meaningful. That was enough. That would always be enough. The communication link crackled again. Multiple voices now. Vess speaking rapidly in Tethran. Nymaresh saying her name over and over. Chen giving medical updates she couldn't process. Then his voice cut through. Sharp. Urgent. "Kyle, something's happening. The cascade. It's collapsing." She didn't understand. The cascade had been expanding steadily. Mathematical precision. Inevitable growth. "It just stopped," Chen continued. 20 minutes ago, right after you completed the recalibration. It stopped expanding and started contracting. It's collapsing back on itself." Kyle tried to process that information. Failed. Her mind too fragmented to handle new data. "The energy release. Kyle, it's heading toward the station. Impact in 30 seconds. We don't know what..." The communication link died. Then the light changed. The cascade's collapse hit the threshold station like nothing Kale had experienced or imagined. Not destruction. Not force in any conventional sense, just pure brilliance, pure pressure, pure presence from every direction simultaneously. She felt it pass through her. Through the suit, through her failing body, through the cellular structures busy destroying themselves. Wave after wave of energy that should have obliterated everything it touched. Instead, her heart, which had been stuttering on artificial support, suddenly found its own rhythm. Regular, strong, natural. The pain vanished, not fading gradually, not becoming manageable, just gone. Present one moment and completely absent the next. The fatigue lifted, the cellular damage reversed. The radiation effects that should have killed her within the hour simply stopped and unwound themselves. Her vision cleared. The tunnel expanded back to full awareness. She could see the whole chamber again, could feel her body again, could think clearly for the first time in hours. What? What was happening? What? The medical readouts on her display went insane. Cellular regeneration, tissue repair, system restoration. Every marker of her approaching death reversing, shifting back toward baseline and beyond. Kyle gasped. First full breath in hours. Her lungs expanded completely. Oxygen flooded her bloodstream with efficiency her compromised system shouldn't possess. She stood. Her legs responded. Held her weight. Moved when she commanded them to move. Alive. She was alive. Not dying. Not barely functional. Alive. The communication link crackled back to life. Chen's voice, barely controlled. "Kyle." "Kyle, respond. Your readings, I don't understand. You should be..." "I'm here," Kyle managed. Her voice sounded strange, stronger than it should be. "I don't know what happened. I was dying, and now I'm not. The cascade's energy," Chen said rapidly. "When it collapsed, it didn't destroy, it healed, reset every system it touched, including you, including the radiation damage. Kale, you're not just stable, you're recovering, you're going to survive this." Survive. The word felt impossible. Foreign. She'd prepared for termination, accepted it, made peace with it, built her entire understanding of the past 14 hours around the certainty of ending. And now, survival, continuation, the future extending beyond this moment, in ways she hadn't imagined possible. Kyle looked at her hands, steady, whole, functioning without artificial support, looked at the core, still pulsing with its otherworldly light, looked at the chamber that should have been her tomb, but had become instead the site of impossible resurrection. She started laughing, couldn't help it, exhausted, bewildered laughter that might have been hysteria, but felt more like release. She'd walked into death with steady hands and emerged on the other side. The universe had accepted her sacrifice and then returned it. "I'm alive," she said, testing the words, making them real. "I'm actually alive." The rescue shuttle arrived 90 minutes later. Kyle walked to it under her own power, her body responding normally, despite having been hours away from final collapse just a short time before. The crew, 2 Tethrans and a Kolvan, stared at her with open wonder as she boarded. "You should be dead," one of them said. Not accusatory, just observation. Statement of fact that defied every projection, every model, every understanding of biological limits and radiation exposure. "I know," Kyle agreed, settled into the passenger seat. "I don't understand it either." The flight back to the research station passed in surreal calm. Kyle watched the threshold station recede through the viewport, that massive structure she'd saved through choice and been saved through chance. Both truths existing simultaneously, sacrifice and survival, intention and accident, meaning and randomness intertwined past separation. The correlate had gathered again. When the shuttle docked, the observation deck held hundreds of beings, all of them silent, all of them watching as she emerged from the airlock. She'd removed her helmet during the flight. They could see her face now, see her eyes, see the impossible reality of a human who'd walked into certain death and returned. Vess stepped forward first. Her skin cycled through colors Kyle had never seen before, patterns that suggested emotions beyond the Tethran capacity to process. She stopped directly before Kyle. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Vess did what she'd done before Kyle departed, touched her forehead to Kyle's, shared breath, shared warmth. But this time the gesture carried different meaning. Not farewell, not witnessing departure, but welcoming return, acknowledging the impossible. "You came back," Vess whispered. "You walked into termination and came back." "I didn't mean to," Kyle said honestly. "I was ready to stop. The universe had other plans." When Vess withdrew, Kyle saw moisture on her skin. Not tears, Tethrans couldn't cry, but some other secretion, some biological response to emotion that exceeded her species' normal range. Nimaresh approached next. Their skin was fully opaque, the first time Kale had seen them completely closed off. Protection. Defense against feeling too much. "I thought I'd lost you," Nimaresh said quietly. "You did. For a few minutes at least. I was dying. Then I wasn't." "How does that feel?" Kyle considered. Confusing, grateful, terrified. Like I prepared for an ending that got cancelled at the last possible moment, and now I don't know what to do with continuation. Nimaresh's skin flickered. Brief transparency. Then opacity again. "Then you'll learn. We'll help you learn. Dr. Chen waited until the others had greeted her before approaching. He carried a medical scanner. "I need to run every test available. You understand that, right? You just survived the unsurvivable. Science demands we figure out how." "I know." Kyle extended her arm for the preliminary scan. "Whatever you need." The scanner's display made Chen's eyes widen. "Your cellular structures, Kyle, they're not just repaired, they're optimized. Better than before the mission. Better than baseline human. It's like the Cascade's energy didn't just fix the damage, it improved you." "Improved?" "I can't explain it yet, but we'll find out." He deactivated the scanner, looked at her directly. "I'm glad you're alive. I know you weren't planning on it, but I'm glad." "Me too," Kyle said, surprised to realize she meant it. They kept her in medical observation for 2 weeks. Not isolation this time, observation. Her body had been unmade and remade by forces that violated understood physics. The correlate's best minds wanted to ensure she remained stable, that the miracle wouldn't reverse itself. Kale endured the tests with patience she hadn't known she possessed, let them scan and analyze and catalog every aspect of her post-Cascade biology, answered questions about what she'd felt, what she'd experienced, what she remembered from those final moments before the energy wave hit. She existed in strange emotional limbo, grateful to be alive, grieving the completion she'd prepared for, uncertain about what came next. The future had become a blank space where certainty used to be. Vess visited daily, arrived at exactly 1400 hours, regardless of what else demanded her attention, sat beside Kyle's bed. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they sat in silence. The consistency mattered more than the content. On the 5th day, Kyle asked, "Why do you keep coming?" Vess's skin shifted through thoughtful colors. "Because you matter. You made a choice that changed how I understand consciousness, how I understand will and purpose and the terrible beauty of beings who choose meaning over safety. Watching you almost die and then watching you survive changed something in me. I want to honor that. Want to be present for whatever comes next. What if what comes next is boring?" Vess's mouth curved in what Kale had learned to recognize as Tethran amusement. "Then I will be present for boring things. That is also a choice worth making." Nimaresh brought gifts, small things that accumulated on the shelf beside Kyle's bed, a data pad loaded with music from a dozen species, a plant from the station's hydroponics section, something with blue-green leaves that required daily watering. The stone from before retrieved from Kale's quarters and returned to her. "You gave this to me before I left," Kale said, turning the smooth stone in her hands. "I know. I took it back after. Wanted you to have it again. Same object, different context, new meaning. Reminder that things can persist across discontinuity." Kyle held the stone, felt its familiar weight. "Thank you." On day 10, Nimaresh brought a question instead of a gift. "What do you want to do after they release you?" Kyle opened her mouth, closed it, realized she had no answer. For 8 years, she'd wanted nothing beyond completing her research and existing minimally. Then, for 14 hours, she'd wanted only to finish the recalibration and terminate. Now she had no idea what she wanted. "I don't know," she admitted. "That's okay. Not knowing is different from not choosing. Take time. Figure it out. We'll be here while you do." That night, alone in her observation room, Kyle cried for the first time since Isaac died. Cried for 8 years of emptiness. Cried for the brother who deserved better from her. Cried for the impossible gift of survival she hadn't asked for and didn't know how to accept. But also cried with something that felt like relief, that she was alive to cry at all. When the tears stopped, she felt lighter, not healed. Healing would take longer, but less burdened. She picked up Nimaresh's stone, held it while she slept. They released her on day 16. Kyle walked back to her quarters on legs that felt steady despite everything. Her quarters hadn't changed, but she had. The emptiness that had felt appropriate before now felt like absence, like she'd been living in a space designed for ghosts. She stood in the center of the room, uncertain what to do next. A chime at her door. Vess and Nimaresh together, carrying food containers. "We brought dinner," Vess said, "and company if you want it." Kyle stepped aside, let them enter. They sat on the floor together, shared food, talked about small things, laughed at Nimaresh's story about a lab accident. "Can I ask you something?" Kyle said eventually. "Always," Vess replied. "Why does this feel harder than dying?" Nimaresh answered. "Because dying was a single choice. Living is many choices, every day. It requires different courage. I don't know if I have that kind of courage." Vess's hand found the back of Kale's neck. "You have 3 weeks of evidence suggesting otherwise." Before leaving, Nimaresh pressed the stone into her palm again. "Remember to hold something every day that has weight but is not work." 2 months later, the correlate convened a gathering. Not ceremony, but acknowledgement. Kyle had been asked to attend. She chose to go. Stood before hundreds of beings and listened as Vess described what they'd learned. The cascade's collapse had been triggered by the core's stabilization. Kyle's survival seemed impossible, but had occurred. A Kolvan elder asked, "Do we now ask individuals to choose death for collective benefit?" "No," Kyle said firmly. "What I did doesn't create a template. It was specific to me, to my damage. You can't systematize it. Then what should we learn? That some things can't be systematized. You can only witness them and remember." Nimaresh proposed a new position, studying choice itself across species. Kyle had agreed to fill it. I can't promise answers, Kale said, but I can promise to keep asking questions with help. Afterward, Vess found her by the viewport. Are you certain? Kale looked at the stars. I'm terrified, but that's okay. Better than numbness. 6 months later, Kyle moved into larger quarters, designed for collaboration. Her belongings remained minimal, but no longer absent. The stone, Vess's painting, Chen's plant. Her work had changed completely. Days spent in conversation with researchers trying to understand choice across species. Frustrating, rewarding, vital. She had coffee with Chen weekly. They talked about loss and unexpected survival, held grief together without trying to solve it. Every week, Vess and Nimaresh came for dinner. They talked, laughed, simply existed together. One evening, Kale said quietly, I'm glad I survived. Silence. Full silence. I didn't think I would be, Kale continued, but I'm glad I get to keep choosing. Vess's arm circled her shoulders. We're glad too. A year later, Kyle stood in the observation deck for the annual reflection. She chose to speak. I learned that surviving is harder than dying, she began. Dying required one choice. Surviving requires choosing every day. She saw Vess in the crowd, saw Nimaresh, saw Chen. I learned that damage doesn't have to be permanent, that change requires intention and support, that I matter not because I almost died, but because consciousness itself matters. She concluded, what I did won't be replicated, but maybe it can remind us that consciousness contains possibilities we haven't imagined. Our job is to remain open to surprise. Afterward, her quarters filled with friends. They talked late into the night. When everyone left, Kyle stood alone. But it didn't feel like isolation. Felt like intermission. She picked up the stone, held it, thought about the year that had passed. She walked to the window, looked at the stars. They looked the same, but she felt different. She was part of the universe, small part, temporary part, but part nonetheless. And that felt like enough. Her door chimed. Nimaresh stood there. I forgot to tell you I'm proud of you, they said. Thank you. After Nimaresh left, Kyle returned to the window. Tomorrow she'd wake up, continue her work, have coffee with Chen. Tomorrow she'd choose to continue. Each choice building on previous choices until they accumulated into something resembling a life worth living. Not perfect, not uncomplicated, but hers. Chosen, meaningful. She felt her heartbeat steady. Regular pulse that had stopped once and started again. She was alive, impossibly alive, and choosing to stay that way. That was enough. That would always be enough. The stars continued their eternal dance, indifferent to everything, but Kale no longer needed them to care. She cared. Her friends cared. That made the difference. She placed the stone on its shelf, turned away, prepared for sleep in quarters that felt like home. Tomorrow would bring new choices. She knew which she'd choose and smiled.